Life sentence without hope. The dark side of Pelican Bay State Prison. The walls that whisper. If you think you've seen the darkest corners of humanity, think again. Hit that subscribe button, like this video, and prepare yourself, because tonight we're stepping into the living tomb known as Pelican Bay. The storm rolled in from the Pacific like a warning. Thunder growled above the endless pine trees that surrounded Pelican Bay State Prison, California's most feared penitentiary. The rain slammed against the razor wire, each drop echoing like the heartbeat of the damned. Inside, under dim fluorescent lights, guards moved in silence, their boots squeaking against concrete floors slick with humidity. It was 2:14 a.m. when Officer Miguel Ortiz heard it, a faint tapping sound coming from C Block Security Housing Unit, Cell 209. This is you. Solitary confinement. A place where men vanished into madness. Ortiz had walked these halls for 10 years and he'd learned one rule: never respond to whispers in the SHU at night. But the tapping continued, rhythmic, deliberate, like code. 3 taps, a pause, then 2. He froze outside the cell, flashlight trembling in his grip. Inside, through a scratched glass window, the inmate sat perfectly still, eyes wide open, staring at the door. Inmate's name, Marcus Red Holloway. Former gang enforcer, accused of killing 3 men behind bars. But Ortiz knew something didn't fit. Red had spent the last 11 years in isolation. No contact, no movement, no fight. He shouldn't even be awake. Yet his lips moved, soundless, forming words Ortiz couldn't hear. Later that morning, Ortiz filed a report. Routine. But something about Red's eyes wouldn't leave him. There was fear in them, not defiance, not rage. Fear. And Red wasn't a man who scared easily. 3 days later, Ortiz didn't show up for his shift. His locker was found open. His badge was inside. No one saw him leave. The prison administration brushed it off. Personal issues, they said. But Red's cell told a different story. Carved into the concrete wall were 4 words, barely visible under the dim light. The walls can hear. Detective Gwyn from Crescent City PD was called to look into the disappearance. She had investigated countless murders, but Pelican Bay wasn't her usual battlefield. When she walked into the SHU, the air felt thicker, charged with something unseen. She passed cell after cell, silent faces peering from the shadows. But in Red's cell she stopped cold. There, written in chalk beside the carved words, was a series of numbers. September 14, 89. A date. September 14, 1989, the year Pelican Bay first opened. Gwyn dug into the archives and what she found chilled her. That same date marked a containment breach during the prison's construction. A buried incident sealed from public record. No details, no reports, just a single phrase in the system log. Emergency lockdown initiated, Section E sealed permanently. No one in current staff had ever heard of Section E. Gwyn met Red that afternoon. He sat behind thick glass, cuffed, frail, eyes sunken but alert. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice hoarse. "They'll make you disappear too." "Who's they?" Gwyn asked. Red leaned closer. "Not who. What?" "The SHU doesn't just keep men locked in, it keeps something buried." The lights flickered. For a split second, the surveillance monitor behind them showed static, and then an image, grainy and distorted. A corridor deep underground, lined with identical steel doors, one of them slightly open. The guard beside Gwyn frowned. "That's not one of ours." When the feed cleared, the image was gone. Gwyn didn't sleep that night. The words echoed in her head. The walls can hear. She couldn't shake the feeling that Ortiz hadn't just vanished. He'd found whatever was hidden beneath the prison. The next morning she returned to Pelican Bay. But this time the warden met her at the gate. "Detective Gwyn," he said coolly, "we appreciate your concern. But your access ends here. Officer Ortiz's case is closed." Gwyn's stomach dropped. Behind the warden, on the concrete wall, she noticed fresh paint covering something. The outline of carved letters still faintly visible beneath. She leaned closer. The letters spelled Section E. As she turned to leave, a faint sound echoed from within the 3 taps, a pause, then 2. Exactly like before. The hidden wing. The sky above Crescent City was colorless that morning, just a dull stretch of gray pressing down on the ocean. Detective Gwyn sat in her car outside Pelican Bay's eastern gate, replaying the sound from the night before in her mind. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. It wasn't random. It was code. She flipped open Ortiz's personnel file, the one she wasn't supposed to have. He'd served in the Marines before joining the Department of Corrections. He knew Morse code. The tapping Red used matched SHUE. It didn't make sense at first until Gwyn noticed the last letter, E. Section E. That was the moment she decided she wasn't done. Gwyn met with an ex-convict named Raymond Spider Cruz, one of the few who'd ever survived the SHU. He'd been transferred out years earlier after filing a lawsuit about illegal conditions. He laughed bitterly when she brought up Section E. "You don't go looking for that part of the prison," he said. "Back then they used to take certain guys out of their cells at night. They never came back. The guards called it the crawl space." Gwyn pressed him for details, but Spider refused. "Listen, lady, some things you dig up you end up joining." That night, Gwyn drove back to Pelican Bay under the cover of darkness. She used Ortiz's old security card, still valid, to access the administrative wing. She moved through the corridors with only her flashlight, the hum of generators echoing through the hallways. Inside the SHU the air was dense, almost humming. Every step she took seemed to echo forever. She reached Red's cell again. He was awake, waiting. "You came back," he said quietly. "I need to know what's below this block," she said. "Section E. What happened there?" Red looked down, voice trembling. "They built the SHU over something that wasn't meant to exist. There was an experiment. Isolation wasn't just punishment, it was control. They studied what happens when a man forgets the world." Gwyn frowned. "You're saying it's psychological?" Red smiled, but his eyes were hollow. "They wanted to break us, but they broke something else instead. After a while the walls start talking back. And some men never stop listening." Before Gwyn could respond, the intercom crackled to life overhead, a metallic voice repeating, "Emergency lockdown initiated. All units return to base." But the control room was empty. Her flashlight flickered. For a second she thought she saw movement at the far end of the hall, a shadow slipping through a door that wasn't supposed to exist. When she reached it she saw the words etched faintly into the metal. "Section E, authorized personnel only." The lock was rusted. She forced it open. Inside was a stairwell descending into darkness. Every step downward changed the air, colder, thicker, harder to breathe. The walls were wet, covered in condensation. And then she saw it, a long corridor lined with cell doors identical to the SHU above, but older, forgotten. Dust covered everything. She shined her light on one of the nameplates. The engraving read #E07, Ortiz, M. Her blood froze. The cell was open. Inside were only a few things, a folded uniform, a half-burned notebook, and words scratched into the wall. "I can hear them now." Gwyn picked up the notebook. The pages were filled with frantic writing, coordinates, dates, symbols, and a phrase repeated dozens of times. "The SHU isn't above us. It's inside us." A low hum vibrated through the floor, almost like machinery waking after years of sleep. Then the door she came through slammed shut behind her. She turned, pounding on it. No response. Her radio fizzled with static, then a voice, faint, distorted. "Detective Gwyn, you shouldn't be here." It was Ortiz. Her breath hitched. "Ortiz? Where are you?" But the voice didn't sound alive. It was too calm, too mechanical. "Leave," it said. "Before they hear you." And then silence. Gwyn stood in the dark corridor, surrounded by the whisper of dripping water and the low buzz of unseen circuits deep within the prison's belly. Then, from the far end of the hall, a flicker of movement, a figure slowly walking toward her. She raised her light, but the beam caught nothing human. Only a reflection, a camera lens embedded into the wall, turning, tracking her. And beneath it, a small speaker crackled with Red's voice. "I told you, detective, the walls can hear." The forgotten experiment. The air in Section E felt heavy, the kind that pressed against your lungs as if the place itself didn't want you breathing inside it. Detective Loring Gwyn stood frozen beneath the camera that had just moved on its own. The lens whirred softly, adjusting its focus. It was alive. She stepped back, light trembling in her grip, trying to steady her breath. The corridor stretched ahead, a skeletal tunnel of rust and shadow. She whispered into her radio again, but only static replied, faintly shaped like a voice, whispering her own name back to her. Then, from somewhere deep down the hall, a low mechanical hum began, a sound that pulsed through the walls like a heartbeat. She followed it, one cautious step at a time, until she reached a reinforced steel door with a shattered keypad. Scratched above it were the words, Experiment Delta, 1989. The year the prison opened. The year everything began. Inside was a long, narrow chamber lit by flickering blue lights. Dust danced in the beams like falling ash. At the center stood a metal table with leather restraints, and beside it, a stack of dusty reels and a half-broken monitor. She pressed play. The screen crackled to life, a black-and-white recording, timestamped September 14, 1989, 3:12 a.m. It showed a man strapped to the table, eyes wide open. A doctor's voice echoed off camera. Subject E07 demonstrates advanced signs of isolation breakdown. Recommend cognitive integration. Another voice replied, calm but cold. Proceed. On the monitor, the man began thrashing, screaming silently. Then, suddenly he froze, and the signal cut to static. One's stomach turned. She rewound the tape, slowing it frame by frame. In the instant before it cut out, she caught a glimpse of the man's face, gaunt, terrified. His ID tag read Ortiz Miguel. The sound of boots echoed behind her. Gwyn spun around, flashlight raised, but no one was there. The corridor beyond was empty. She turned back toward the monitor, only to see the static morphing into an image, the very room she was standing in, viewed from a higher angle. The camera feed was live. Something was watching her. She ripped the tape from the reel and shoved it into her bag. Then she ran, following the long hallway toward the stairwell. Her footsteps thundered against the concrete, echoing back like someone, or something, was running just behind her. When she reached the top, the door wouldn't budge. It was sealed shut. She slammed her shoulder against it, panic rising. Suddenly, the intercom above crackled. Detective Gwyn. You've seen too much. It was the warden's voice. You think this prison was built to hold criminals? It was built to hold them, the ones who knew the truth. Ortiz got close. So did Holloway. And now so have you. Her flashlight flickered, and in the stuttering light she saw movement in the glass of a nearby observation window, faces staring back at her from the other side of the wall, pale and motionless, like photographs burned into the concrete. Then the light went out completely. In the dark, something whispered inches from her ear, not a voice but a thought pressed directly into her mind. The SHU isn't a place. It's a design. The emergency lights kicked on. Gwyn was standing alone, but the floor beneath her was covered in fresh footprints leading away from where she'd stood. They stopped at a wall, a blank, solid barrier. And then she saw it, the outline of a sealed door, faintly visible beneath the layers of concrete. Painted across it, half erased by time, were the words, Project Paragrin, Cognitive Control Initiative. Gwyn stared at it, realization dawning like a slow horror. Pelican Bay's isolation unit wasn't just a prison, it was a test. The SHU had been engineered to break the human mind, to see how long someone could exist in silence before surrendering to control. Ortiz had uncovered it. Red had survived it. And now the prison wanted her to become part of it. She turned back to the stairwell, clutching the tape. But the hum she'd heard before had returned, louder this time, pulsing through the concrete like a heartbeat. Gwyn froze as the lights dimmed again. Down the corridor, every steel door began to open, one by one, their hinges screaming in unison. And from within the last cell at the far end, a shadow stepped out, slow, deliberate. It looked exactly like Ortiz. Only his eyes were no longer human. The man who spoke to shadows. The storm outside Pelican Bay was merciless that night. Rain slashing sideways, thunder rolling over the gray concrete like an ancient drum. Inside the prison's administrative wing, investigator Jordan Cross sat alone, staring at a stack of files that made less and less sense with every page. Each folder told the same story: transfers, solitary placements, threat assessments with no evidence attached. Men thrown into the SHU for association, their only crime being a name mentioned in another inmate's confession. And in the center of it all, Warden Lyle Harmon. Jordan ran a hand over his face, exhaustion and disgust weighing him down. It's not about control, he muttered. It's about silence. Meanwhile, in a cell deep within the SHU, Marcus Razor Vance pressed his ear against the cold steel vent. His voice, hoarse from years of isolation, whispered through the grates to the cell next door. You still there, Gordo? Pause. Then a faint reply, still here, brother. Still breathing. Vance exhaled, almost smiling. 4 months, the two men had communicated this way, through the vent system, creating their own world in the echoing dark. But tonight was different. Vance had something new. They reopened the old laundry block, he said quietly. New staff rotation. You know what that means. Movement, Gordo answered, his voice trembling. Yeah, Vance said. And maybe a way out. The idea of escape was madness, but madness was all they had left. Across the yard, Officer Daniel Holt was struggling with his conscience. He joined the prison staff years earlier believing in justice, believing that isolation kept the violent in check. But after seeing inmates like Vance talking to the walls, carving messages into their skin, and begging for sunlight, he wasn't sure what justice meant anymore. That night, while making his rounds, Holt slipped a folded note under the food slot of Vance's cell. Read, "I can help you. Laundry block Friday night. 0200 hours. But Holt's gesture didn't go unnoticed. In the shadows of the monitoring room, Warden Harmon's assistant, Clark, saw everything. He picked up the surveillance feed, zoomed in, and froze the frame on Holt's face. A cold smile spread across his lips. "You're playing with fire, Danny," he whispered. Friday came like a storm waiting to break. When the night shift rolled in, Holt used his key to unlock the rear corridor of the laundry block, an area long abandoned since a 1990s fire. The smell of mildew and rot clung to the air. His flashlight beam caught the shape of Vance, thinner than a scarecrow, his wrists raw from years of steel. "You really think this is gonna work?" Vance rasped. "I don't know," Holt said. "But you don't belong in a tomb." For the first time in years, Vance stepped into open space. Real air, real ground beneath his feet. Freedom was a few steel doors away. Then came the sound, boots pounding, radios crackling, orders shouted. Clark's voice boomed over the intercom, "Holt! Step away from the inmate." The next seconds blurred, shouts, gunfire, the sound of metal hitting metal. Holt dragged Vance through the smoke-filled corridor as alarms blared through the compound. The storm outside raged in sync with the chaos inside. By the time the noise died, Holt was gone. Vanished. His badge was found in the mud near the perimeter fence, but his body was never recovered. Vance was dragged back to the SHU, beaten, stripped, and sealed away again. Only this time he wasn't just a prisoner, he was a symbol. A whisper that spread through the vents, from cell to cell, from man to man. Someone tried to help. In the following days, Jordan Cross discovered something even darker. Holt's disappearance wasn't the first. At least 3 correctional officers who questioned solitary confinement had vanished since 2010, all tied to accidental drownings or resignations. The truth was beginning to surface. But with every file he opened, Jordan realized something chilling. Every document that could expose Warden Harmon's operation had been erased or replaced. The entire system wasn't just corrupt. It was self-protecting. And as Jordan left the prison that night, headlights glared in his rearview mirror. A black SUV followed him down the winding coastal road, staying just close enough to remind him. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, and Pelican Bay buried its secrets deep. But in the shadows of the SHU, a whisper still traveled through the vents. A whisper that would soon ignite something unstoppable. The walls remember everything. The morning fog rolled over Crescent City like a ghost that refused to leave. Pelican Bay stood against it, gray, silent, and brooding. A fortress that had seen more madness than mercy. Inside, the air felt heavier, charged with something unseen but deeply alive. 3 weeks had passed since Officer Holt vanished. The prison called it an escape attempt gone wrong. But the inmates knew better. The whispers through the vents had grown louder, spreading from cell to cell like wildfire in the dark. They silenced him. They made him disappear. Where next? Investigator Jordan Cross wasn't sleeping anymore. His office was buried under paperwork, audio recordings, and evidence photos, each one pointing to a truth that could destroy careers, maybe even take lives. He'd found a pattern, signatures on the solitary confinement orders, all signed by Warden Lyle Harmon. But some of the inmates on those orders didn't exist. No booking numbers, no histories, no release files. Ghost prisoners. He picked up the phone. "Give me the Department of Justice, Internal Affairs." But the line went dead before it ever connected. Moments later, a soft buzz came from outside his office window. A black drone hovered there, silent, recording. When Jordan rushed to the glass, it darted off into the mist. Something was watching him. Meanwhile, deep inside the SHU, Marcus Vance lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He hadn't spoken in days. Not since Holt's disappearance. Not since he heard the boots outside his door that night, the whispered orders, the screams that followed. He'd been back in the hole for 19 days straight. No light. No sound but his own heartbeat. "No. Razor? You awake?" It was Gordo's voice, faint but steady through the vent. "Still here," Vance muttered. "You hear the news?" Gordo said. "They found something in the bay." Vance froze. "What?" "Body in a correctional uniform. No head. They say it's Holt." The silence that followed was suffocating. Vance closed his eyes, but all he could see was Holt's face that night in the laundry block. The flicker of hope, the belief that even in a place built to erase men, someone still cared. But hope was a dangerous thing in Pelican Bay. That same afternoon, Jordan Cross drove north toward the coast, determined to find out for himself. The coroner's office was quiet, too quiet. The body bag on the steel table had no label. Inside, the remains were badly decomposed, but one thing stood out: a tattoo on the wrist. 3 lines crossed by 1 slash. A mark Jordan had seen before, on inmate files on graffiti inside the SHU. It wasn't Holt. It was one of the ghost prisoners. Someone had staged the discovery. Jordan realized then what Holt must have discovered before he disappeared. Pelican Bay wasn't just burying inmates in solitary. It was erasing identities. Men transferred, on paper, but never reappearing anywhere in the system. They didn't die. They were disappeared. That night, Jordan uploaded everything: photos, signatures, the falsified reports, to a hidden cloud drive. Then he sent one email. To the San Francisco Herald. Subject: The tomb inside Pelican Bay. Attachment: confidential files, do not ignore. He hit send. But before he could even close his laptop, his office door creaked open. Working late again, Cross? It was Warden Harmon, his voice low and almost calm. Behind him stood 2 guards, faces unreadable. You've been busy, Harmon said, stepping closer. Too busy. Jordan swallowed. You think you can bury the truth forever? Harmon smiled, a small hollow smirk. The truth doesn't matter here. Only the records do. And we control the records. There was a long silence, broken only by the sound of rain hammering the window. Then a gunshot. The next morning, prison staff reported that investigator Cross had taken his own life. The official story spread quickly. File closed. Case resolved. But 2 days later, a package arrived at the San Francisco Herald. Inside were hard drives, recordings, and one handwritten note. If this reaches you, it means they failed to silence me. Tell the world what's really buried at Pelican Bay. The exposé went live. Photos of empty cells, death logs, and erased inmate IDs filled every major network. Protests erupted across California. Families of missing inmates demanded answers. And within a week, Pelican Bay's security housing unit was shut down. Yet even as the world celebrated the victory, there were whispers, quiet, cautious ones. Because among the photos leaked to the press was one final, unexplained image: a surveillance frame from the night of Holt's disappearance. In the corner, barely visible, was a man walking through the fog near the fence. The timestamp was from 2 hours after Holt was presumed dead. And his badge was still pinned to his chest. They said no one ever escapes Pelican Bay. But maybe, someone did. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Subscribe now, because the next case will make you question everything you believe about justice.